Well, last week, Pastor Zach started this series called Hello Victory. And he started off by sharing the very first step in victory is our heart. He said there's two types of hearts, right? There's a heart that's running away from God, and then there's the heart that's running toward God. And if we want to find victory in our life, we first need to have a heart that is running towards God, right? Now, I'm here this morning to take part 2 in that. And this whole series, we're looking at how we can find victory by looking at the life of David and how he found victory in his life. And so we're in First Samuel 17. Last week we looked at 1 Samuel 16. We're in 1 Samuel 17, and I have 37 verses on my page. I'm not going to read all 37, okay? I'm going to give you an overview. Now, how many of you are familiar with David and Goliath? Okay? Pretty popular story, right? I said, Zach, thanks for giving me one of the easiest passages in Scripture to preach on my very first time. All right, David versus Goliath. Now, let me give you some background. The Philistine army was coming to battle the Israelite army, and there were two mountains. And it said the Philistine army was on one side on this mountain, and the Israelite army was on the other side, and there was a valley in between them. And every day, this 9-foot tall giant would come down into the valley, and he would yell at the Israelite army and say, hey, send one of your guys down here to battle me. And whoever wins determines the fate of the whole war, right? So instead of having everyone come and battle, let's just do a one-on-one, mano-a-mano, winner takes all type thing, okay? 9-foot dude, he was pretty scary, okay? And no one from Israel was going to step out and fight that guy. In fact, it says that every time he yelled, they were shaking in their boots. They were afraid. They were already defeated by the mere sight of this giant. So every day for 40 days, he would come out and yell at the Israelite army. Now, going on in the background, there's David. His dad, Jesse, has 8 sons. 3 of his sons are there at the battle, his 3 oldest. And David is out tending the flocks. And on day 39, David calls Jesse and says, hey, David, come here. Tomorrow I want you to take cheese, some flour, and all the supplies. Take it to the front lines. Go find your brothers. Get a report. Tell me what's going on. So the next day, day 40, David takes all that stuff out to the battleground, drops it off with the keeper of the goods, and he goes and finds his brother. And it happens that right at that exact time that David gets there is when Goliath is walking down into the valley and starts his daily ritual where he shouts at the nation of Israel. Except this time it says when he shouted, the men ran in fear. They were so afraid of this guy. And David hears it and says, what are we doing? Why isn't anyone going out and taking this guy out? We serve the living God. How come no one's doing this? Now, he says this near his older brothers, and it says his older brothers were mad. They were ticked off at their little brother. Now, are there any little brothers in here? Any youngest? Okay, I'm the youngest of 3. My brother's 10 years older than me. My sister's 7 years older than me. I was the accident. I was. My parents admitted it. I was the accident, yeah. Wasn't supposed to be. And whenever my older brother would have his friends around and I'd come around and say something like snarky, he would just beat the snot out of me, right? So I understand the older brother anger towards the annoying little brother, right? So David, this 12, 13-year-old kid is coming out here going, who's this giant? Why aren't we going taking him? Do you guys not know the God we serve and remember the victories in our past? Why aren't we going out and taking this guy out? And it says older brothers were so upset at him. But word started traveling around camp about this little kid named David and what he was saying. And that's where we're going to pick up in verse 31. Verse 31 in 1 Samuel 17 starts with this. It says, when the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, the king. And Saul sent for him. And so David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Don't be defeated just because there's a giant out there yelling at us. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. You are but a youth. You're a 13-year-old kid. You're a junior hire. Hey, junior hire, what are you going to do, right? I work with students. I love that God uses a junior hire here to change the world. God can use anyone to change the world. You're just a kid, and he's been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant, me, David, used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear, and took a lamb from the flock, I went after that lion or bear, and I struck him and delivered the lamb out of its mouth. And if he arose against me, I would catch him by his beard and strike him and kill him. It's a gutsy 12-year-old, right? I'll hit this bear, and if it comes back to me, I'll just grab him on the chin. Your servant has struck down both lions, plural, and bears, plural. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. And that's all we're going to read this morning. I'm going to let Zach preach on Goliath next week. But what I want to take away this morning, one thing that we need to understand, this is in your notes, is that the victory that is ahead of us is won by being faithful in the battles behind us. Let me say that again. The victory ahead of us is won by being faithful in the battles behind us. David was ready for Goliath because he was faithful when the lion and the bear came. The lion and the bear prepared him for the giant. What are the things that you have in your life right now? What are the struggles? What are the trials? What are the lions and the bears right now? Are you faithful through them now? Because there's a Goliath coming down the road. I want to share a little bit about my story. I went to Cal Baptist University here in Riverside, right? So I said I was 36. 34 of my years have been in Northern California. I'm a Northern California guy, all right? I'm a huge Oakland A's fan. I got a lot of flack for this. I'm a huge Oakland Raiders fan, okay? Someone asked, can pastors even be a Raider fan? Yes, Raider fans need Jesus, okay? So that's my mission field, I guess. I'm a huge Golden State Warriors fan, which is so nice having the best team in all of sports after 30 years of just mediocrity. And I'm a San Jose Sharks fan. So I'm a big sports guy. I'm competitive, hate losing, love victory. That's why I love this series, right? So Northern California guy, 2 of those years were at Cal Baptist. I was a junior college transfer, and I did not know Jesus. Cal Baptist offered me a scholarship to play water polo. And their sales pitch to me was, hey, Matt, there's 4 girls to every guy who goes to school here. And we'll give you money to play water polo. Sign me up. Cool, I'm in. New student retreat, I gave my life to Jesus. Completely changed my life. That's another story I'll share another time when Zach has me preach. But I'm there, and the moment I give my life to Christ, I sense God calling me to be in the ministry. And I said no. And God continued to call me for the 2 years I was there, and I kept saying, no, God, I want to be a paramedic firefighter. I want to work 10, 24-hour shifts a month and then have 20 days off. That's what I want to do. I was set at it. God said, no, you're not going to do that. So right after I graduated on May 1st, 2004, I went on a month-long mission trip to a country called Suriname. Not a really well-known country, Suriname. It's formerly Dutch Guyana. So in northern South America, there's Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana. I don't know if I have the order correct. And then Brazil is right below it, okay? So it's like the northern Amazon is where I was at. And I went and we shared the gospel with a tribe in the jungles of South America. And we took a projector, a sheet, a generator, and a VCR. And we took the Jesus film, translated into their native language. We shared the gospel with this tribe for 3 weeks. Okay? Now, here's the interesting part. It was not a Native American tribe. It was an African tribe in a South American jungle. So slaves that escaped the Caribbean went down to the jungles and set up a tribal kind of mock of what they had in Africa in the South American jungles. Unbelievable experience. And on that trip, we had to swim with, we had to bathe in the rivers and swim with piranhas, right? And I know there's piranhas there because where I bathed, we went fishing and I caught 5 piranhas. I was like, I was swimming right there. That's good. They don't eat you unless you're bleeding, I was told. So so don't bump your toe on a rock and start bleeding, right? So we slept in hammocks with bug nets and all that sort of fun stuff. And on that trip, I finally relented. I said, okay, God, I'm yours. I see you working in an amazing way here. When I get home, ministry it is. Whether it's a pastor or a missionary, whatever it is you're calling me to, that's what I'm going to do. So I come home from this 3-week trip, ready to start this new thing. And my car was at Cal Baptist because the trip was through the school, and I was going to get to my car and kind of figure out where I was going to go. I had no plans after graduation. And my water polo coach calls me in and says, hey, Matt, you have a couple offers to try out and play for a professional water polo team in Australia or New Zealand. I was like, okay, that's cool. But I just said, God, I'm in. God, you have me. And I turned down both those opportunities. Now, before you're like, oh man, water polo players make like $50 a week. It's not like it's not like the major league professional contracts you're thinking of, where it's like, yeah, I could have signed a $10 million contract to play water polo. Water polo is not that popular of a sport for people to watch. So, but I turned it down, and I did what every 21-year-old single male wants to do, and I moved back home with mom and dad, right? And I started waiting tables to save up money so that I could go to seminary. I was trying to be obedient to what God was calling in my life, and I was waiting tables at a baseball-themed restaurant. I told you guys I like sports, called McCovey's. Willie McCovey played for the Giants and has had this this cool restaurant up in Walnut Creek, up in the Bay Area where I was. And Willie McCovey would come in, and Cal Ripken came in one time, and Joe Morgan came in all the time. It was really cool. And one time I get this table of 11. So it's two families, a family of 6 and a family of 5, and they sat in my section. And I come up to them, I get their drink orders and get them appetizers, all that sort of stuff. And then the guy sitting right in the middle, he goes, what's your passion? It's an odd question. Ever had someone ask you what your passion is? And so I was like, well, to be honest, my passion is I want to be a pastor or a missionary. I'm waiting tables to save money so that I can go to seminary. And no joke, he goes, get out of town! Like yells it for everyone in the restaurant. I'm like, okay. He goes, did you know you're serving 2 pastors right now? I'm like, what? So he and his brother were both pastors, and as their families. And he starts and he says, you know what? God brought you here for a reason. So, okay. He said, I just became senior pastor at a church in San Ramon. I said, I live in Danville, 5 minutes away. He said, why don't you come to our church and intern for us, and we'll pay for your seminary. Okay, I'll be there on Sunday. I think it was a Friday night. So that Sunday, my dad and I went to visit Church of the Valley. About 60 people there. And talked to the senior pastor. He said, hey, you're here, good job. Come meet with me on Monday. We'll start talking about your internship. I said, okay. So I met with him on Monday. He's like, I'm going to give you some jobs that I need you to do for me. Sure, Pastor, what do you need? He said, first thing I need you to do, I need you to take care of all of these props that we had from all of our children's musicals. They haven't used them for years, right? I want you to take them out of the attic, throw them out of the attic, and then go take them to the dumpster. Can you do that? Sure. So my very first job at the church was taking care of decade-old dusty props and throwing them away. So I did that. He said, good job. Come back tomorrow. I came back the next day. He's like, Matt, I want you to paint this conference room. Okay. He said, here's all the paint supplies you need, just paint. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, is he Mr. Miyagi? Like, is there, am I going to learn how to bless people or something? So I paint it, right, and do all this. And he says, okay, one more job for you. Next week, we're going to remodel the preschool room. The cabinets were falling apart and the carpet was all dirty. So that I got people donating all this stuff. I just need hands to do it. Can you come and do it? I said, sure, great, I'll be there. So the third job, putting in cabinets and painting walls and do all that sort of stuff. And then he brought me in and he said, let me take you to Scripture. Let me take you to something you need to understand. And he opened Matthew 25. Matthew 25, verse 14, he had me read it, and starts with this. He said, for it'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one, he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to their ability. Then he went away. He who had the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also the one with 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled the debts, settled accounts with them. And he who received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you are a hard man. You reap where you do not sow, and gather where you scatter no seed. So I was afraid. I was defeated. I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours back. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was mine with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast that worthless servant into the outer darkness, and that place will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So my pastor, Pastor Mike, he says, Why do you think I had you read that? I have no biblical training. I have no idea. He says, let me teach you a biblical truth. Let me teach you why I had you do those 3 projects. And this is in your notes. Here's the biblical truth. When we are faithful with little, we will be entrusted with more. When we are faithful with little, we will be entrusted with more. You see, those 3 things, he kind of was like Mr. Miyagi. He was testing me. He was testing to see if I was going to be faithful to finish the job all the way to completion. He was testing me to see if I was going to work hard at even these menial tasks, right? Paint this wall. He was going to see am I going to paint this room to excellence? Am I going to do a 2nd or a 3rd coat and try to make this look as great as I can make it? And he sat me down. He said, Matt, you've been faithful with all these little things that I've given you. Now I know that you can be trusted with more. And that was the beginning of my internship. Another thing I didn't share about that story, that night as he was talking to me, there was a little girl. She was 17 at the time. My future wife was sitting right next to him. That guy's my father-in-law. You see, God has a reason when we do things. God had a reason I turned down the opportunity to play professional water polo. If I had said yes to that, I wouldn't have been married to my wife for the last 11 years. I wouldn't have Brooklyn. I wouldn't have Harper. I wouldn't have Malachi. I wouldn't have the opportunity to come and to serve here at Fusion Church with all of you, because God used that. And being faithful in those little things, God allowed me to be entrusted with more. And the same is true in your life. For you to find that victory, to say hello to victory, you need to be faithful with the little things that are in your life so you can be entrusted with more as you move forward. Now, I want to talk about one little thing from that last passage, right? It's something you guys have probably heard a ton of times. That well done, good and faithful servant, right? That's all what we want to hear when we stand before the Lord one day. When we enter the gates and God say, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little. You can be entrusted with more. Come enter my rest, right? Well, in Acts chapter 13, we hear David's well done, good and faithful servant. Acts 13:36 says this, when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep, meaning he died. He was buried with his fathers, and his body decayed. Now, you might be reading Acts and just skip over that, right? When David served his purpose. You see, that's God telling David, well done, good and faithful servant. You served my purpose in your lifetime. That's what God has called each and every single one of us to do, to fill his purpose in our lifetime, to be faithful with the gifts and the talents, to be faithful through the trials and the hard things in our life, so that when we stand before God at the end of our time, we may be able to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You served your purpose in your generation," just like David did. Now, did David do some screwed up stuff? Yes. He's a sinner, just like all of us. We all fall short. We all mess up. But that doesn't disqualify us to keep moving forward. Moving past our sin, moving past our mistakes, moving past our failures and our losses, moving past our victories and not resting on our victories, but continue to move forward to the day that we stand before God. Two things I want to share about the little things in our life that prepare us for the big. This is in your notes. The little things, they may seem big at the time. The little things in our life may seem big at the time, but they are small in comparison to what is ahead. Think back at David. Do you think that lion and that bear seemed small at the time? No, it was a lion and a bear. I don't think any of us are going to go run after a bear with a staff and a rod and say, "I'm going to take this thing on and I'm going to win. I'm going to get that sheep back that it drug away." But when you compare it to Goliath, the 9-foot giant, that every single army man, these are soldiers. All the soldiers were scared of this dude. And this little junior hire comes up and says, "God brought the bear. God brought the lion. The giant's next." The things you're going through in your life, they may not seem small right now. They may seem like they're lions and bears. But as you move forward in your life, you're going to be able to look back and say, that was just a lion and a bear. I'm slaying this giant in front of me now. When we're faithful with little, we can be entrusted with more. 2 Corinthians 4:17. It's a life verse of mine. I have it tattooed on my wrist right here as a reminder, so I see it. It says this. It says, "For this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." Okay? So what it's saying is, these light and momentary, these hard things we're going through that are light and momentary, they're preparing for us something far greater than we could ever imagine. When I think of light and momentary, do you know what I think of? I think of a mosquito bite. They're not very fun. They itch. But after a day or two, they're gone. Light and momentary. Do you know what the Apostle Paul called light and momentary? Let me share with you what the Apostle Paul called light and momentary in his life. In 2 Corinthians 11, now, back when the Apostle Paul would write a letter and send it to a church, right? They didn't have chapters and verses. So the pastor didn't go up there and be like, "We're going to open Paul's letter, the second letter to the Corinthians, and read the 17th verse in the 4th chapter, and we're going to talk about that for 40 minutes. No, they opened up the letter and read the thing from start to finish. Okay? So you'd have a context. So Zach said next week he's just going to read 1 Corinthians from front to back, and that's going to be a service. No, he's not going to do that. I'm just kidding. But they're meant to be read as a letter, right? When you receive a letter in the mail, you don't just read the first 3 lines and say, "Now let me pick those lines apart and really study them and understand." You read the whole letter to understand the whole context of what the writer was trying to portray. And so in reading this, you need a whole picture of what is going on in the book of 2 Corinthians. And so he says in chapter 4, light and momentary afflictions. Well, in chapter 11, he then explains the afflictions that the Apostle Paul went through. In chapter 11, it says that 5 times he received the 40 lashes minus 1. Jesus only received it once before he died. The Apostle Paul received it 5 times. 5 times he was whipped, 39 times, because they believed the 40th whip would kill you. Light and momentary. Bug bite. 3 times he was beaten with rods. The students always giggle when I say this. 1 time he was stoned. "Oh, he's stoned." It's not what he's talking about. Right? Stoning was actually pretty serious. They'd put you in a pit, and they would pick up the biggest boulder that they could possibly grab and drop it on you in the pit until you were crushed to death. In fact, they left him there in the pit thinking he was dead, and his friends had to pull him out. Light and momentary. 3 times he was shipwrecked. A day and night he was adrift at sea. He was in constant danger from rivers, robbers, from the Jews, from the Gentiles, in the city, in the wilderness, at sea, and with false brothers. All of that, light and momentary. All of those troubles and those hard things that the Apostle Paul was going through, he says when you compare them to the hope that we have in eternity, they're light and momentary. Now, I want you to think of your life. What hard things are you going through in your life? They may seem like a giant. Cancer diagnosis. And compared to eternity is light and momentary. Even if you lose the battle to cancer, it's light and momentary compared to the hope and the joy that is found in heaven. If your marriage is in struggles, fight through it because it's light and momentary compared to what God has prepared for you. Whatever you're going through, think of it with eternal perspective. What God is doing is light and momentary. And the last thing I want to share with you this morning. Never, ever, ever give up. I think Winston Churchill said that once. You see, the fastest way to defeat is to quit. But if we want to find victory in our lives, we have to battle. We have to move forward. We have to stay faithful in those little things so we can find the victory. The Apostle Paul said it like this in Philippians, right? I love the Apostle Paul because he was so humble, even though he was probably the most influential man besides Jesus and maybe Peter in the entire world, right? The Apostle Paul, he writes to Philippians, he says, I have not reached my goal. I'm not there yet. I am not perfect. Is anyone in here think you're perfect? Good. No hands up. None of us are perfect. We'll never arrive. We're never going to make it, right? He says, Christ has taken hold of me so I can keep on running and struggling to take hold of the prize. My friends, I do not feel that I have already arrived. None of us have arrived. But I forget what is behind me. I forget the losses and the hurt that's behind me, and I move forward. I struggle for what is ahead. I run toward the goal so that I may win the prize of being called to heaven. And this is the prize that God offers because of what Christ has done for us. Never give up. What you're facing right now might feel like a Goliath. Don't give up. It's only a lion or a bear. Don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. You can endure through anything. You are stronger than you think. So don't give up. He says it again this way in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. He says, let us not get tired of doing what is right. Don't get tired of doing what is right. For after a while, there's going to be a little bit of time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't get discouraged and give up. If you're ready to quit on your marriage, don't give up. Your marriage is worth fighting for. God ordained that marriage. Keep fighting, because after a while, you will reap a harvest of blessing. Do not throw in the towel. If you're struggling with your teenage kids or your young kids, don't give up. Keep investing in them, because after a while, you will reap a harvest of blessing. Whatever you're thinking about quitting, don't give up. Endure. Keep on keeping on. Don't quit. You see, God has called all of us to be faithful in the little things that He's entrusted us with. All of us can sit here and think through the things that God has entrusted us with on a personal level. I want to share something that God has entrusted this church with on a level. You see, the church isn't this building or this piece of land. The church is all of us. The church is the people, right? And God's doing a work here at Fusion. If you can't tell, every week it's more full. God is reaching and winning lives right here in Temecula, but we don't sit back on our victories. Hey, we had an awesome week for Friends and Family Week last week, right? We had a ton of people, record attendance. Let's just sit back on that victory. No, that's behind us. Let's move forward to the next victory that God has for us. Let's move forward and reach more people for Jesus. There's more families that need to be invited here to have their kids influence. There's more families that need the love and the light of Christ in their lives, and God's going to use us to do that. In fact, you can hear the kids making noise over there through the wall because we have a ton of kids. And so you know what? If you're a parent, I need you to be faithful with the little things and to serve with me in the kids ministry. Why? Because the kids are worth it. 3 John 4 tells us there's no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. How can our children walk in the truth if we don't have anyone telling them about it? And I need workers. And so if you're a parent, my expectation with grace, I'm saying this with grace and love, my expectation is that you go to the welcome table and sign up for the iServe team and say, I'm going to start helping with children. It only has to be once a quarter, once a month, whatever it is. I need your help because God has entrusted us with all those kids over there. Are we going to be faithful with what he's entrusted us with? So that a year from now, instead of entrusting us with 40 kids, we have 140 kids. And God's using this church to impact this valley to change lives. That's what God's doing. God's called us in our lives to be faithful with little, and he's called our church to be faithful with what we have so that we can be entrusted with more. God is moving. Now you might be sitting here saying, okay, so I got to be faithful with little if I want to find victory in my life. Let me rewind. If you don't have a relationship with Jesus, you can't be faithful with the little things yet because you got to be faithful with Jesus. If you've never given your life over to Jesus, that's victory number one. That's victory over sin and death in our lives. Jesus died and gave his life and conquered sin and conquered the grave on Easter Sunday when he rose again so that we could have a life of eternity. He gave his life for us so we could find that victory. And if you're sitting here this morning, you've never given your life to Jesus, I want to encourage you at the end of the service, when it's all done, no one is in here anymore, I'm going to be standing right here. If you want to give your life to Christ, I'm asking you to come and pray with me because it's the greatest decision you can ever make with your life.